I came on board very early when it was still being devised in Australia. So they sent over a couple of trainee script editors that I was training. And basically, in a soap, you've got division of labour between the story side of it and the script side of it. So Jason was running the story side of it and I was running the script side of it. And it was my job to find and train writers in New Zealand and the script editors and teach the process, which is kind of like was the Germans called industrial television, and which is the process that was devised in Australia, basically originally to fill the quota that they have in Australia, and they had to make cheap, accessible television, and they came up with this system of which Neighbours uses, and then they've exported that. I suppose it's technology all over the world, including to New Zealand. Writers here weren't used to that pressure and process, and I would ring up people because I was trying to find writers, right? I was, and a lot of people weren't very good writers, or they weren't very experienced at writing realistic dialogue. They were very theatrical, and I ended up with a whole lot of scripts that I've read like kind of sub-Oscar Wilde plays where people sat around in drawing rooms making pronouncements. So just getting that kind of style, which was like how New Zealanders speak. You'd walk around and people would speak one way and then they'd write completely different. There wasn't as much naturalistic dialogue, I don't think. And also there was just an attitude, like I'd ring up a writer and say, I hear you're quite a good writer, are you interested in writing for this new series? And they'd go, I can't do anything next week and not the week after, and the week after that I'm in Melbourne, I've got a conference, but the week after that I could do a script. And I'm kind of looking for 5 writers a week, And so it was and we sent out writers' kits, and so it was a long process of trying to find writers. And in the early days, they used some Australian writers who were writing from Australia who knew the process, and their scripts, they weren't Shortland Street really. But then Rachel Lang came on board as story editor, and the show quickly got a much more New Zealand feel about it, and the writers came on board, and who were, it was a process of finding the writers and training them. How do you write to time? How do you write a script that's not going to be an hour long, or there were very strange scripts came in the early days. But when we first put it on, people complained about New Zealand accents, and all this. I mean, people forget what an enormous impact it's had just being out there 5 days a week. I mean, there were lots, there was New Zealand TV before, but, a lot that I saw did have a certain English feel about them, and I just thought, one of the reasons I came to work on Shortland Street was because on Neighbours we weren't allowed to do race stories. We weren't allowed to have, Jason and I spent ages trying to write an Asian family into Ramsay Street with no success. And then Katerina, one of the things she said to me was that, no, I want it to be, multicultural. I want, Pacific Islanders and Maori characters. And that was one of the reasons I came to work on it. And so it's always had that aspect to it. I remember writing this scene where Kevin Smith was supposed to meet this crim and find out some information, and the scene had been set just like outside a prison or something, and it just seemed really boring. And so I decided I'd get Kevin to follow this guy to his dope plantation, and then I thought it'd make it a bit interesting. So I put it was booby-trapped, and so there was a tripwire and a shotgun that goes off, and it was just sort of, all it was to pass on a little bit of information. But it was sort of fun to write it. And then I went out on set and it was pissing down with rain, and they were out at, Riverhead Forest, and there were like trucks everywhere and generators and all these cast and crew and people slotting through the mud, and a fake dope plantation, and, armourer setting up the gun, and they had all this safety, and you're watching it and just think, I just wrote that because I just wanted to make this passing on of information a little bit more interesting. And now I've sent 100 people out into the bush for a day and it's pissing with rain, and it made you aware of the responsibility of writing, because a lot of writers write in isolation, and one of the things about learning to write for TV is you have to learn the consequences of what you write. We wanted to do a show about kindness. And it's sort of funny because you've worked long enough, there's all these mantras about writing, there's no forward movement of story except through conflict, and, all these kind of mantras. And I think there's a lot of bullshit. Well, it's partly true. It's like you have to know those things. It's like you have to know the form. And so we've worked in those dramas. We've done conflict drama. We've done all that kind of stuff. And we wanted to set out to write a show where we had no villains and we had no conflict in the classic sense, and that there was a group of people trying to do the right thing, but life isn't that easy. So what we were saying, in a sense, was that, you can make the best laid plans you like, but it can still all turn to shit. But it's about people supporting each other. And So that doesn't mean people don't fall out or have arguments or the rest of it, but essentially at the heart of Go Girls, it was always an optimistic show. And we wrote stuff in about, like, one of the characters was a financial advisor and hated his job and realised he was lying to customers and his company was going broke. And we wrote this before all the companies went broke. You know, it was like we were just on the cusp of what was happening. Yeah. We came at it from several angles, but originally we just wanted to do a sense of this guy who wakes up in this place and doesn't know who he is. Right, that's a starting point. You go, oh, that's interesting. But when we started developing, we talked about a gated community and slightly in the future and whatever. Rachel and I were talking about capitalism and rather, you know, a lot of those shows used to be about kind of a socialist, you know, the kind of Big Brother or the kind of fascism or whatever. And we were talking about how capitalism controls differently through the illusion of choice. And so that was very deliberate through This Not My Life, that it was the experience of going into a dairy and buying a bottle of water and realising there were 8 different brands and they're all owned by Coca-Cola. So it was partly about the illusion of choice, which is one of the underlying things with it. I mean, This Not My Life was we did completely differently. We set up our own production company to make it. We worked with Desert Road, but that was partly for their facilities and as an umbrella, but we set up our own production company. We hired the key personnel, the directors, the process we invented, because a lot of TV here, like under the South Pacific Pictures thing, you'd have several directors who come in and don't own the... We only had 2 directors. They directed back to back. They were really involved in the whole setup and the look, and Rob Sarkis and Peter Salmon, the 2 directors. Tracy Collins designed both the set and the costume. It was a massive job. The whole look and feel of it was all integrated. And we had to do it on a New Zealand budget, which people don't realise, to do an action mystery series. I mean, TVNZ wanted it lost, you know, and they don't, you know, they spend more on one episode than we can spend on a whole series. It didn't rate really well, and yet it had one of the highest on-demand figures because people were downloading it. And my theory was that the people that own black boxes have to watch a lot of TV to even qualify for a black box. And I think This Not My Life appealed to people who don't watch TV, because a lot of the people that came up to me and talked to me in the supermarket everywhere would say, oh, I don't really watch a lot of TV, but I love that show, you know? My vision of Matariki was a lot funnier than the final film, which I think is quite earnest and serious, and Michael's a quite earnest and serious person. And Michael and I very rarely ever agree on a film we like. Like, he'd text me, you've got to see so-and-so, and I'd go back, I want that 2 hours of my life back again. So stylistically, it's not my, you know, it was not my cup of tea. You know, there's some very emotional moments. I took my children and they just bawled, they loved it. But we had a script read through a few years ago where people were rolling in the aisles. It was so funny. Humour's a way into liking people, understanding people. So if people are in shitty circumstances, but there's still something funny about them, and you kind of sympathise with their struggle. Originally, the junkie girl and her boyfriend, they were supposed to be this kind of hopeless kind of lovers who were just so hopeless. Like, there was a sex scene early on where she's really pregnant and he's just got out of prison and she wants to have sex and he's not quite sure how to do it. And it was really funny, and Michael didn't shoot that because he didn't know how to shoot it, because he found it tone-wise, he couldn't make it work. Now but that's the thing, like, a director takes a film, and the script really is a blueprint for a film, you know, it is, and the director takes it and makes the film his or hers, you know, that's what happens. Nick Ward and Rachel and I often talk about Nick Ward as a writer of Stickman, another film. We decided that the difference between amateur writers and professional writers was amateur writers think they're geniuses who haven't been discovered yet. Professional writers know they're frauds who are waiting to get caught. And there is an element of, I mean, I love what I do, and it's kind of like sometimes you go, oh my God, we're making another series and I get paid to write this, and I love my characters and I love the shows. So I just keep doing it as long as I can.